So in this book by Rabbi, let me just get his name out here, Raphael Shore. Let me get this focus going good. There we go. Who's afraid of the big bad Jew? Look at the size of the Jew. Poor little Hitler down there. And the jihadists, God bless him, and the leftists. He quotes from the Torah. We split the Red Sea split. It's actually the Sea of Reeds. We went through. When this happened, the peoples here, they tremble. Everybody knew it happened. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Then the clans of Edom were dismayed. The tribes of Moab trembling grips them. And the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. What's so bad? Through the might of your arm, they are still as stone, till your people cross over, God, as we are crossing over. One thing I see from this is that everybody's connected, even though that Edom is not next to the Sea of Reeds, not so far, but let's say in Moab is much further, and let's say that's Jordan today. And all of these different countries, how do they know about all of this? Because everything, in fact, is connected. But they don't see it that way. They just see that there's a tremendous disruptor coming. Remember that the word Sinai is based on the word Sina, which means hate. It was at the moment that received the divine blessing of being at Mount Sinai, as the whole people was there. Hate developed in other directions. As we delve deeper, and even more remarkable and mind-bending revelation emerges. Not only do both Jew haters and Jew lovers acknowledge the power and influence of the Jews, but Nazism and Judaism share many basic foundational ideas. Astonishingly, these two worldviews, Jewish philosophy, which is called Hashkafa, on the one side, and Hitler's Weltanschauung on the other, are mirror images of each other, with the two standing on opposite moral corners. As we explore further, we'll uncover striking parallels and profound differences that define these opposing perspectives that have shaped history in unimaginable ways. Jewish philosophy and tradition would say that Adolf Hitler was right about the nature of man's struggle and the struggle of the Jewish people's disruptive impact, how it is that we have made a big difference in Edom and Moab. But he was dead wrong morally. Nietzsche, Hitler, and many others believed that a Jewish worldview, now let's try to think about this now, it's happening right now, had transformed Western civilization. Now, they didn't think that's not what's going on now. Now we have a group, the leftists and the Muslims, who think that they are civilization. And therefore, in order for their civilization to survive, they got to get rid of the Jews, humble the Jews, beat the Jews down, kill the Jews. The Nazis believed that the Jews invented world-changing ideas, but they thought it was for devious purposes, to weaken and devastate humanity. Jews, on the other hand, believed that they were given a set of powerful ideas as part of a divine mission. Before we unpack what Jews have traditionally said about who they are, their philosophy, and their mission, let's take a cursory look at how the two worldviews compare. So let's see. We're back into it again. It's happening again. To Hitler, man was just another animal in an uncaring, random, social Darwinian universe. To the Jews, man, that is all human beings, are being created just short of the angels in the image of God's souls of an infinite value. According to Nazi ideology, one great conflict drove all of human history: the battle over humanity's self-definition, the honor concept of nature, which Hitler sought to revive, versus the Jewish human concept. The future of humankind depended on adherence to nature's laws of might and survival, which in his thought was a German people, and so necessitated the defeat of the humanity values of love, brotherhood, and tolerance that Jews had taught and had become pervasive in Western civilization. Now just think about Christianity for a moment, especially in Europe, and you'll see exactly how it is that the Jews, are they supposed to have a monopoly on this, and now that there's still Jews around. Judaism agrees with Hitler and Nietzsche that humanity is engaged in a battle that strikes at the core of the human condition. It's the battle of soul versus body, good versus evil, holy versus profane. In Nazi words, there was the conflict between the human concept and the honor concept. Jewish tradition agrees with Nietzsche that it was they who disrupted and transformed the world, comfortable in the master morality. In fact, he writes 3,800 years ago, a deep-thinking genius named Abraham searched philosophically, and what he found changed the world. This is where the Jewish story begins, with the first Jew. Abraham's discovery of God, infinite yet personal, was humanity's greatest discovery. And Abraham went further. He questioned, formulated, and articulated a complete system of philosophy and ethics that was world-shattering. These principles became the foundations of Judaism. Abraham had accessed the divine life principles that 7 generations later were concretized at the great revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Judaism believes that all human history, and thus every individual human life, is the story of this battle with the human condition. And the salvation of both personal and global is dependent upon the victory of the human concept. Best-selling author Rabbi Jacobson says it well. The struggles to integrate the divine and the human matter and spirit, body and soul, the inner and the outer, are as old as history itself. The tension between these opposing but complementary forces lie at the root of all conflict. Inner and outer, that is, inner is personal, what's happening to me personally, and outer social and political. Hitler said no nation will be able to withdraw or even remain at a distance from this historical conflict. The Nazis believed that spirituality dehumanizes man, while Judaism holds that man humanizes the universe. The Torah illustrates this worldview eloquently through the story of Rebekah. While still in her womb, Rebekah's twin sons fought desperately, causing her such anguish and pain that she sought out to the prophet to explain the unusual nature of her pregnancy. The prophet revealed that she was carrying 2 diametrically opposed leaders. The 19th century Jewish philosopher Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch explained the prophetic response. Rebekah was informed that she carried 2 nations in her womb who would represent 2 different forms of social government. Now, one is the Roman form. The Roman form has 2 forms. I'm just adding this in. One is the Eastern Roman form because the Roman Empire split into 2. This is most prominently displayed by the Russians. And the Western form, which is the Pope. The one state would build up its greatness on spiritual and morals. That's the Jews. On the humane in humans. The other would seek its greatness in cunning and strength. The Romans, the power of Europe. Spirits versus strength, morality versus violence oppose each other, and indeed from birth onwards, they will be in opposition to each other. The whole of history is nothing else than a struggle as to whether spirit or sword, or as our sages put it, whether Caesarea or Jerusalem is to have the upper hand. Now remember, this is ancient, but what is involved in all of these ideas is the fact that the families and the mentalities that go along with them have not changed. We go from generation to generations, but the directions are the same. Judaism and Nazism share a common worldview. There's another world war, one more significant than the battles that we fought with guns and tanks in World War I, World War II, etc., etc. An epic ideological struggle. The Nazis fought on the side of brute force and the Jews on the side of love. One side wielded the might of a vast army and empire. The other commanded an empire of the spirit. The Nazis sought to destroy the moral power of the Jews. They wanted to do it with raw force, through degradation and deprivation, of course, murder, killing millions, and yet they could not achieve their goal. This is interesting. The cults of personality of totalitarian regimes, and now we see the leftists coming to the fore. We see the Muslims coming to the fore with their claims of master races, master religions, the utopian visions, are futile attempts to manufacture the illusion. So he says, what's really inside with the root of these people? That their power can overcome human failings. We're going to make the world perfect through leftist ideas. Islam will conquer the world. Their followers are taught that they do not need to engage in a personal reckoning, if they believe in the power of the Führer or the beloved leader and devote all their energies to fighting for him, which in this case we're still dealing mostly with the ideas of the Muslims today that are attacking us and the leftists. That's a separate analysis, perhaps. Judaism offers no such escape from personal responsibility. Instead, it demands as the essence of faith or morality that comes from a constant dialogue with the personal God. I think about Breslov, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who says basically is that talk to God as much as possible. Hermann Rausching, a former Nazi, tried to alert the world to these ideas. As the president of the Senate of the Free City of Danzig from 1932 to 1934, he had several conversations with Hitler. These conversations led him to subsequently reject the Nazi movement and make his way to the U.S. He wrote several books before and during the war in a desperate attempt to show the free world that Nazism was a serious threat, warning this new element, Nazism. Now you have to go back. So we have to go back. This is 60, what could it be? 67, 80 years ago, 90 years ago. The new element, Nazism, is at the same time of immemorial age. It is the demon of destruction, which had been banned from our normal life by civilization. It's the cravings suddenly grown to immense urgency to throw off all the domestication and all civilized restrictions. Be not deceived. This urge to return to the primitive is felt not only by the Germans, we have it coming now, Palestine from the river to the sea. Among the masses everywhere, there is the same strong desire to throw off the burdens and obligations of a higher humanity. Thinking about, I like to keep contrasting this. You have in Islam a concept in which a person who is an infidel, in other words, it's not part of the faith, it really has very low or no status at all. And so therefore it gives us a reason why we can blow ourselves up or blow them up or just start killing people because they're infidels. So he says, throwing off the yoke. This is the same human struggle that author Fyodor Dostoevsky so powerfully described through the character of Ivan Karamazov in the novel The Brothers Karamazov. set in Spain, very interesting, during the bloody days of the Christian Inquisition. Jesus, who actually is a representative of the Jewish people, bled to death on a cross by Romans, who eventually adopted him as their God. Jesus appears and is arrested by the Grand Inquisitor, who proceeds to lecture him. The Inquisitor argues that Jesus' mistake and sin was expecting too much of humanity. By placing the people on this moral burden of freedom and a moral code, he demanded too much. For this sin, the Inquisitor plans to burn Jesus at the stake for imposing the Judeo-Christian worldview. And here he says, you want to go into the world with some promise of freedom, which they, that is humanity, in their simplicity and innate lawlessness cannot even comprehend, which they dread and fear, for nothing has ever been more insufferable for man and for human society than what? Freedom. Ivan had identified man's discomfort with the burden of personal responsibility. When I joined the Nazi army, I'm part of a brotherhood. When I joined Islam, I'm part of a brotherhood, which has women in it too. Over the side, maybe the back. I'm part of the leftist movement to bring world order to everybody through peace and freedom, that everybody can do what they want. Instead of taking over men's freedom, you increased it still more for them. Did you forget that peace, that is the peace of mind, and even death are dearer to man than free choice and the knowledge of good and evil? There is nothing more seductive for man than the freedom of his conscience, but there is nothing more tormenting either. Jesus' mistake was that he had overestimated mankind. Mankind is animal. I swear, man is created weaker and baser than you thought him. Respecting him so much, you behaved as if you had ceased to be compassionate, because you demanded too much of him. Respecting him less, you would have demanded less of him, and it would be closer to love, for his burden would be lighter. He is weak. The struggle continues today on the global scale of world power and within each of us. Modern German historian Robert Pueh, I don't know how you pronounce it, Poise, I don't know how to pronounce it, describes the human temptation to abandon this ethical call in the favor of less burdensome call to nature. I'm bigger and stronger than you, and I will dominate you. The notion that humans having certain powers over nature are themselves responsible for it in some way, rather than simply adjusting to certain natural laws behind their control. This places a great burden upon them. It's been and is a far easier choice to see man as not being apart from nature, much less above it, but a man is natural, needs to be natural, but of nature. This conflict is the fault lines of the human condition. Now, in Judaism, this is called the fight between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. We have both inclinations. The people who hate us so much think that everything can be done with the Yetzer Hara, that is the physical aspect of us. So the fact that we work so hard on the spiritual spiritual aspect, this gives them pause. Big problem. As we behave to defend ourselves. Now he says, this conflict is the fault line of human condition. On this part, the Torah, Hitler, Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche agree. Hatred takes root precisely against the terrible burden of what? Of freedom of choice. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre also recognized that it is on this fault line where the heart of Jew hatred lies. Now, going all the way back. Now, this is interesting. He uses the word freedom of choice. Many years ago, 1972. Been around. My wife and I were in Tehran, and we had no idea where we were or what the kind of people that we were around were. We just had no idea. Anyway, Baruch Hashem, we found our way to the Jews, who are happy people working in Tehran, and they said one thing to me. It says the Iranis, they like to be led. They're like cattle, herded and led. Now we talk about what's going on in Iran now. They're not throwing off the yoke of the Shia. They are Shia. The people are Shia. They're deeply religious Muslims. They have in the restaurants, you go in or any public place, there will be a big picture of Mecca on the wall. And it's a panorama which shows the ways of Islam, which is, shooting out from Mecca all over the world to transform the world into the ideas of Islam. So right now we're having a time where Islam is meeting the West. So I don't know what's going to come of this, but one thing is we're going to wind up in the middle. Throwing off the Jewish yoke. Here's where we're at. Having lived in Paris through the Nazi occupation during World War II, Sato wrote Anti-Semite and Jew in 1944. It's one of his books, charging that anti-Semitism stems from something fundamental in human nature. That is correct. We call this in Judaism the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to be evil, just do what we want. The fear of the responsibility of being human. Let's read what he wrote. We are now in a position to understand the anti-Semite. So what's coming out of all these leftist countries? He is a man who is afraid of himself, of his own consciousness, of his liberty, of his instincts, of his responsibilities, of solitariness, of change, of society and of the world. And espousing anti-Semitism, though, the Israelis, he does not simply adopt an opinion. He chooses himself as a person. He chooses the permanence and impenetrability of stone. The total irresponsibility of the warrior who obeys his leader's anti-Semitism, in short, is fear of the human condition. We could allow ourselves to be free animals roaming all over the world. Rauschning also saw firsthand that this inner struggle explained why the Nazis targeted the Jews. In the hatred of the Jews, there is an instinctive element that points to a reaction against the author of those tablets of commandments in which the evil was separated from the good, and the separation attributed to a divine will. Well, consequently, anti-Semitism is always most clearly manifest at times of spiritual crisis, which is what is happening in the Western world. We've allowed pornography, particularly pornography, sexual sin, to dominate our societies. I'm really sorry to say that the Torah is very hard against homosexuality practice, the practices of homosexuality. You have to really think about what they're doing and how it works against creation. Homosexuals don't have children. They can't have children. And Peru, Evu, reproduce and multiply, is one of the most important, is actually the first commandment in the Torah. Consequently, anti-Semitism is always most clearly manifest at times of spiritual crisis, and here we are, of human insecurity. Not only because at such times men need diversions, because men are tiring of the burden of a higher life. He writes, when Christians hate Jews, as the church did quite extensively in the Middle Ages. I mean, Can you imagine yourself being burnt? It can be seen as the base side of man revolting against the imposition of a system of moral responsibility by Jesus. Jesus, the Jew. Jesus is the representative of the Jewish world to the Gentile world, which was based on Jewish ideas. Not exactly, because you have the Romans adopted it. They are ultimately the other side of the ball. The 19th century Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig explained this. However, the pagan rises in revolt against the yoke of the cross. When this happens, and they hate the cross, but they can't say that, they live in a Christian society, what does he do? He vents his fury on the Jew, called pogrom. Similarly, on the eve of World War II, Sigmund Freud suggested in Moses and Monotheism that the hatred for Judaism is at bottom hatred of Christianity, because Judaism is inside of Christianity. It's inside of the Jesus the Jew. The Nazi revolution was a modern rebellion against the call to civilization, the call to Sinai. So much effort had been expended to try to bring humanity into the Europeans. But here you're talking about that struggle back in the womb of Rebecca, where these two opposing ideas are bound to clash. And the progenitor of humanity, how does he make an impact on the man who wants everything he can get his hands on? The call to Sinai. During and after World War II, the Arab and radical Islamic worlds, including Hamas and Iran today, picked up the baton. So he's going to have a figure on that on page 88, 89. And let's take a look at this. We'll skip this on the way back, and we'll finish with this. Let me see. In order to do this better, I'm going to have to bring this up like this first. Get it focused. 1 second. You know, my technology is old, so am I. What can I tell you? The Arab world from 1945 to 1962. So this is Morocco, French and Spanish protectorate from 1912, independent kingdom in 1956. There were 13 million people there. In Tunisia, 4 million people. Algeria, 12 million people. Libya, 1.5 million. Moving along. In Iraq, 8 million. In Syria, 5.5 million. In Lebanon, 2 million. In Egypt, 26 million. In Sudan, 12 million. Yemen, 4 million. Saudi Arabia, 6 million. Transjordan, 2 million. This is the Arab world. Let's see what he writes on this. So let's see, does this help me here? He says members of the Arab League, these are all members of the Arab League. Population, these are people who speak Arabic, not necessarily Arabs, but okay, they're Arabs. Population total is 96 million as of 1960. Israel population was 2.5 million as of 1960. So you have 96 of the proportions. Let's read what he says here. We can come down lower now, a little more closely here. In February 1945, an Arab League was established with British encouragement to promote Arab unity. It rapidly became a platform for united Arab activity against the Jewish community in Palestine. Now remember that looking at it in those words, it was an outlet with the Jews of Europe, the massacred Jews, but find a place if they want to make a community in Palestine. It became rapidly became a platform for united Arab activity against the Jewish community in Palestine, After 1945, it also tried to prevent Germany paying reparations to Jewish victims of Nazi persecution. It subsequently became the chief opponent of the State of Israel, which was established in 1948. Now he writes like this: never has the Arab nation commanded such elements of freedom, strength, and opportunity as those which now lie in its hand. With its 12 sovereign states, its vast territory, its great resources of manpower and wealth, it has realized ambitions beyond the wildest expectations of recent years. Is the world really asking too much if it demands of its vast empire that it live in peace and harmony with a little tiny state, established in the cradle of its birth, sustaining its life within the narrowest territory, in which its national purposes can never be fulfilled? Now let's go over this last line. This is all written by Abba Eban. If anybody remembers who he was, he's a man with an Oxford accent, and he became the voice really at the UN for Israel. That's his last lines. Is the world really asking too much if it demands of this vast empire? And this is what he's saying. All this tremendously large group of people between 1945 and 1962 could allow a small Jewish state to exist? That it live in peace and harmony with a little state, established in the cradle of its birth, because we are Jews, this is where we come from, sustaining its life within the narrowest territory. It's a tiny, tiny place in which its natural purposes can ever be fulfilled. Now, to really understand this, we have to see the level of education, the level of poverty that actually exists in these countries, which are all dictatorships, kingships, dictatorships, one-man bands, family religions. They have one place that they have to look, because what they're doing, the kind of excesses, the physical excesses that the people at the top go through in these countries, it has to have some control over the masses. That is the 97% of people who don't have that. Travel in the Middle East sometime, maybe a better time, and you get a good taste of that. This is Baruch Fleischman. Tikkun Elevator Call Out.